disappearance of Sarah Mitchell. In the small, tight-knit town of Willow Creek, everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a leisurely pace. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and neighbours looked out for each other. But that all changed one fateful summer evening. Sarah Mitchell was a bright-spirited young woman who had just graduated from high school. With dreams of studying journalism, she spent her summer working at the local diner and saving up for college. One evening, after her shift ended, she decided to take a walk through the nearby forest, a place she had always loved for its serene beauty. She never came back. When Sarah didn't return home, her parents, Martha and Robert Mitchell, grew worried. They called her friends, checked the diner, and even drove around town, but there was no sign of her. Panic set in as the hours passed, and they called the police. A search party was quickly organised. The townsfolk, police and volunteers combed through the forest, calling out her name, hoping to find any trace of her. Days turned into weeks, and the once hopeful search turned into a grim recovery mission. But Sarah was nowhere to be found. The police found her phone near a stream, its screen cracked and the battery dead. The area was thoroughly searched, but there were no signs of a struggle, no clues to indicate what had happened to her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Months passed, and the town of Willow Creek tried to move on, but the shadow of Sarah's disappearance lingered. Her parents were devastated, their home filled with the unbearable silence of loss. The case grew cold, and the forest, once a place of beauty, became a source of fear and superstition. A year after Sarah's disappearance, a local boy named Tommy was playing near the edge of the forest. He noticed something glinting in the sunlight, half buried under a pile of leaves. Curiosity piqued, he dug it out to find it was an old locket. Inside was a photograph of Sarah, smiling brightly. He ran home to show his parents, who immediately contacted the police. The discovery of the locket reignited the investigation. Detectives scoured the forest again, but despite their efforts, no new evidence came to light. The locket was a heartbreaking reminder of Sarah, but it offered no answers. The years continued to pass, and the mystery of Sarah Mitchell became a ghost story whispered among the townsfolk. Some claimed to see her spirit wandering the forest, while others spoke of hearing her voice in the wind. The forest, once a place of solace, became a place to avoid after dark. One autumn night, 5 years after Sarah's disappearance, Martha Mitchell received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakably Sarah's. "Mum, help me," she said before the line went dead. Martha's heart raced. She called the number back, but it was disconnected. Desperate and determined, she and Robert contacted the police, but they were sceptical. They had long since given up hope of finding Sarah alive. But Martha couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter was still out there. She and Robert took matters into their own hands, spending countless nights searching the forest, calling out for Sarah, hoping against hope that she would answer. One cold, foggy night, Martha and Robert were deep in the forest when they heard a sound, a faint, eerie melody, like a music box playing in the distance. They followed the sound, their hearts pounding until they came to a clearing. There, in the centre of the clearing, was an old, abandoned cabin they had never seen before. The music was louder now, clearly coming from inside. With trembling hands, Robert pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The cabin was filled with old, dusty furniture, and in the corner sat a small, ornate music box, playing its haunting tune. On the floor next to it was a piece of paper. Martha picked it up and gasped. It was a letter, written in Sarah's handwriting. "Mum, Dad, I'm trapped. He won't let me go. I'm so scared. Please find me." Tears streamed down Martha's face as she read the letter. They searched the cabin, but there was no sign of Sarah. The police were called again, and this time they took it seriously, conducting a thorough investigation of the cabin and the surrounding area. In the basement of the cabin, they found a hidden room. The walls were covered in old, yellowing photographs of young women, all eerily similar to Sarah. In the centre of the room was a small locked trapdoor. When they broke it open, they discovered a narrow tunnel leading deep into the earth. The tunnel led to an underground chamber. There, in the dim light of their flashlights, they found Sarah. She was alive but weak and terrified, chained to the wall. She had been kept there all these years by a man who had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the horrors of his deeds. Sarah was rescued and taken to the hospital for treatment. The story of her abduction and captivity shocked the town, and the mystery of the man who had taken her remains unsolved to this day. The cabin in the forest was torn down, but the memory of what happened there lingers. Sarah eventually recovered, but she and her family could never forget the nightmare they had lived through. The town of Willow Creek returned to its quiet existence, but the legend of the forest grew. To this day, people still claim to hear the sound of a music box on the wind, a reminder of the horrors hidden in the most unexpected places. And the question remains, who was the man who took her and where did he go? The Shadow at Miller's Creek. Miller's Creek had always been a small, quiet town nestled deep in the woods of Maine, a place where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened. But in the fall of 1982, a darkness fell over the town that would forever change the lives of its residents. It all began with the disappearance of Jenny Harper, a high school senior known for her bright smile and kind heart. She had been walking home from a friend's house one evening, taking the familiar path that ran along the edge of Miller's Creek. When she didn't arrive home, her parents and friends organised a search party, scouring the woods and the creek for any sign of her. But Jenny had vanished without a trace. The police were baffled. There were no signs of a struggle, no clues to follow. It was as if Jenny had simply stepped off the path and disappeared into thin air. Rumours spread quickly through the town, whispers of an old legend about the woods that bordered the creek, a legend that had been forgotten by most. According to the old stories, a man named Thomas Grady had lived in those woods over a century ago. He was a recluse, a shadowy figure who was said to have dabbled in dark rituals and witchcraft. The townspeople had feared him, believing he had made a pact with something evil that dwelled deep in the forest. One night, Grady had disappeared, and the townspeople breathed a sigh of relief. But soon after, children began to vanish, always on nights when the fog rolled in thick and heavy. In the weeks following Jenny's disappearance, the town was gripped by a growing sense of dread. Parents kept their children close and no one ventured out after dark. Then one night, the fog returned, creeping through the trees and blanketing the town in an eerie silence. That same night, Peter Lawson, a local handyman, was driving home after a long day of work. His truck's headlights cut through the fog, but visibility was poor. As he approached the old Miller's Creek Bridge, he saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a girl, soaked from the mist, her hair hanging in wet strands around her pale face. Peter pulled over and rolled down his window. "Are you all right, miss? Do you need a ride?" The girl looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Please help me, he's coming." Peter's heart raced. "Who's coming? Are you Jenny Harper?" The girl nodded, her eyes darting to the woods. "He's here. We have to go." Without hesitation, Peter unlocked the door and Jenny climbed in. As he drove off, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the fog, he saw a shadowy figure standing on the bridge watching them. Peter floored the gas pedal, racing toward town. "What happened to you, Jenny? Where have you been?" "He took me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's been keeping me in the woods. He's not human. Not anymore." Peter's mind raced. He had heard the old stories, but he had never believed them. Now, with Jenny sitting beside him, he couldn't deny the terror in her eyes. "We need to get you to the police," he said. But as they neared the town, the truck's engine sputtered and died. Peter swore. He tried to restart it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The fog closed in around them, thick and suffocating. "We have to run," Jenny said, opening the door. "He's coming." They fled into the night, stumbling through the fog toward the lights of the town. Behind them, they heard the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, growing closer. They reached the town square, breathless and terrified. Peter pounded on the door of the police station, and Sheriff Mike Anderson opened it, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of Jenny. "We need help," Peter gasped. "Something's after us." The sheriff ushered them inside and locked the door. "What the hell is going on?" Jenny collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "It's Thomas Grady, he's come back." The sheriff frowned. "That's just a story, it can't be real." Peter shook his head. "I saw him, Mike. He's real, and he's coming." Before they could say more, the lights flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness, and an unnatural silence fell over them. Then, from outside, came the sound of footsteps on the wooden porch. "He's here," Jenny whispered. The sheriff drew his gun, his hands shaking. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving toward the door. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the door burst open, and a figure stepped inside. He was tall and gaunt, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. His face was twisted into a grotesque smile, and his voice was a low, rasping whisper. "You can't escape me." The sheriff fired his gun, but the bullets had no effect. The figure moved toward them, his presence filling the room with a suffocating darkness. Peter and Jenny backed away, their hearts pounding with terror. Desperate, Peter grabbed a wooden chair and swung it at the figure. It shattered on impact, but the figure remained, unharmed. He reached out a hand and Peter felt a cold, paralyzing grip around his throat. "Run, Jenny," Peter choked out. Jenny hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled into the night. The figure released Peter, letting him fall to the floor, gasping for breath. He moved toward the door, but the sheriff stepped in his way, brandishing a silver cross. "Stay back, you bastard," the sheriff growled. The figure recoiled, hissing in anger. Peter struggled to his feet, and together he and the sheriff forced the figure back inch by inch until he was out of the building. The figure vanished into the fog, but Peter and the sheriff knew he would return. They barricaded the door and waited for dawn, their hearts heavy with fear and uncertainty. Jenny was found the next morning, wandering near the edge of the woods. She was taken to the hospital, where she was treated for her injuries. She refused to speak about what had happened, and in time she moved away from Miller's Creek, unable to bear the memories of that night. The town tried to return to normal, but the fear lingered. The legend of Thomas Grady grew, and parents warned their children to stay away from the woods, especially when the fog rolled in. And though the figure was never seen again, the residents of Miller's Creek would always remember the shadow that had fallen over their town, the shadow of a darkness that could never truly be vanquished.